What's going on, my fellow Jedi and Padawans? Welcome back to another Jedi gaming video. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the channel, and if you guys are new, welcome. Today we are going over our first build of Season of Plunder with a Liar's Handshake Arc 3.0 Hunter, so you can see in this gameplay. Before we get into that, got that giveaway for a Pixio monitor, 24-inch, 144 Hz, 1 millisecond refresh. This thing is banging. You'll never miss a thing while you're gaming with this. So make sure to enter down below in the description. You got until September 14th when the giveaway ends. But starting off with the first build of Season 18 with Season of Plunder, we have an Arc Strider using the new super and the Liar Handshake exotic arms. So to start out, we're going to go over our abilities, aspects, and fragments, as well as this new super, Gathering Storm. Super high DPS, where you hurl your arc staff forward, creating an AoE of damage in the area, jolting those nearby targets, and that jolting, as you can see, causes little chains of lightning to nearby targets. So it's almost like a scorch effect that we had for Solar, but in Arc. So to start off with abilities, we're running Gambler's Dodge to make sure that we always have our melee ability. When we're next to enemies, we can dodge and get it back instantly. For PvE, always go in triple jump in my opinion. Then we're using combination blow, so as we get target defeats, we have melee increased damage, stacking up to ×3 when we get defeats with our melee. It is super nice because it also gives us a little bit of health, which also procs via our exotic gauntlets. For grenade, I run Pulse or Storm are my two go-tos right now. Very fun, but for this build, we're running a Pulse grenade. For our two aspects, we're going to use Flow State, so when we defeat jolted targets, it makes us amplified. When we're amplified, we dodge faster, which is nice, allowing us to use that Gambler's Dodge just a little bit faster, and we get to move around super fast. When you're amplified, you get that speed boost, and you are absolutely hauling. For our other aspect, we're using Lethal Current, so after dodging, your next melee attack has increased range, jolts the target, and creates a damaging aftershock. So this is super gnarly because we're going to have our dodge and melee consistently, so we're going to be able to blind targets and jolt them just with melees, and as you can see, it wipes out ads super fast, and we also do crazy damage on bosses, champions, one-shotting some unstoppables in lost sectors. For the legendary version at 1570 with 1-2 punch, we'll get into that, but this helps so much as well for our aspect. Now, after the raid got cleared this past weekend, we were able to unlock our last 4 fragments. That's why I waited to start my builds until this week, just so we didn't have to switch it up and make a couple different videos just for one single build. So to start off for me, I'm going with a Spark of Beacons. So while you are amplified, your arc special weapon creates a blinding explosion, and we're going to be using an arc shotgun with 1-2 punch. So all of those defeats that we get with the shotgun create a blinding explosion when we're amplified, and it is very easy to become amplified by defeating jolted targets because we're making them jolted via our melee attack. So it's an easy chain of proccing all of these together. Next off, we got Spark of Resistance. So while you are surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage, which is super nice because we are up close and personal with this build here. Next off, we have Spark of Ions. Defeating jolted targets creates ionic traces. Once again, this plays perfectly into our aspects and melee. So when we dodge and get that melee defeat, we're going to jolt targets, creating those ionic traces, which in turn, when we get those, grant us ability energy, allowing us to spam our grenade, melee, and dodge even more. And finally, we have Spark of Feedback, which is one of the ones that we got after the raid raid was cleared, so we get 10 resilience to help us stay alive, and taking melee damage briefly increases your outgoing melee damage, which plays perfectly again into combination blow and the exotic arms Liar's Handshake, as you will see. So as soon as we get hit by a melee, we're going to be doing some crazy damage output on the receiving end. Next off, going over your weapons. For your primary, doesn't really matter whatever you like to use. These are my top 3 that I've been using. Fatebringer, this new Forensic Nightmare that I just crafted, leveling it up, and then my submission with Subsistence Frenzy. Love having these in my kinetic slot, but definitely my go-to is this Sudden Death with Threat Detector 1-2 Punch. So as you can see, 1-2 Punch hitting an enemy with every pellet in a shot increases melee damage for a short duration, allowing us to just absolutely nuke enemies with just our melee once we get that to proc with combination blow and with our exotic arms, as you will see. For our heavy, we're going to be using the Thunder Lord for that Arc 3.0 synergy, working on the Catalyst to get that done, which basically gives us subsistence. So this thing is super nice for taking it into endgame, especially since it's an overload champion intrinsically this season. Now, for our armor over here, we're running our double 100 in resilience and mobility. Mobility so we can get that dodge back a little bit faster, and then resilience, like I said, because we're going to be up close and personal with this build. Now on our helmet over here, we got Shotgun Finder for our Sudden Death, as well as Harmonic Siphon, creating those orbs of power when we get defeats with our Thunder Lord, as well as our Sudden Death. And then Bountiful Wells, because we're going to be running 2 melee well makers, which make us a ton of those arc elemental wells. Now on our exotic arms right here with Liar's Handshake, you can see our exotic perk Cross Counter. So using your melee ability or being hit by a melee attack, which goes back into that aspect of feedback, it allows us to follow up with an extremely powerful melee counter punch that also heals us. So this is super important because it wipes out enemies and it heals us when we connect with this melee, and especially with that lethal current aspect that we have, it chains and jolts enemies, which just procs all of our fragments and allows us to create ionic traces. So it's crazy the synergy that they allowed us this season and gave us with Arc 3.0 and Liar's Handshake, because this was really good beforehand, but I feel like the way we can stack everything is already gnarly. I hit 1 champion in a lost sector for 105,000, easily wiped it out, and super fun to use this build. On top of that, we're going with melee well makers. So when we get those defeats with a powered melee attack, we have the spawning of arc elemental wells, and like I said, we're going to be using 2 of these, so there's going to be about 4 of them that drop every single time that we get a melee defeat, basically, with this build. We're also running Unstoppable Shotgun so we can take it into some of that endgame and lost sectors. Now on our chest piece, this is our second melee well maker, which stacks perfectly because of Bountiful Wells on our helmet, and then machine gun reserves for that Thunder Lord. On our legs here, we got Powerful Friends and Invigoration. Powerful Friends to give us that mobility, juicing it up to 100, as well as Invigoration, reduce melee cooldown each time we pick up an Orb of Power, which we are creating via Harmonic Siphon, and defeats with both our Sudden Death and Thunder Lord. And last but not least, super important for this build and increasing our melee damage once again, Well of Ions picking up Arc Elemental Wells causes your next melee to deal increased damage, and since we have the double melee well makers on our arm and chest piece, like I said, we're creating about 4 of those elemental wells every single time we get a powered melee defeat, and we have our melee and dodge up consistently with how this pairs together. And then on top of that, we got Thunderous Retort, so we have extra arc super damage if we cast while critically wounded or amplified, and we are becoming amplified super easy with jolting enemies and getting melee defeats and defeating those jolted enemies. As you can see right here, we absolutely blow through this lost sector on the moon. with the add clear potential of this build and the melees, especially once you get that lethal current to proc. So after the dodge, your next melee has increased lunge range, jolts the target, and has that aftershock. So once that's procced, it is very good for add clear. And then once you're picking up your wells, getting the dodge with combination blow, as well as getting hit by a melee to proc our fragment and feedback, as well as Liar's Handshake, you absolutely annihilate enemies with this melee. On top of that, we have the shotgun that has 1-2 punch, which just adds again a little extra DPS for the melee. So it's super easy to take into endgame activities like this lost sector, blow through them with no worries, just dodging, melee, dodging, melee, dodging, melee. Get a shotgun shot in there, here and there, to get that 1-2 punch to proc and get some orbs of power to proc. Definitely one of my favorite builds to go through this season. Been using it in the raid a lot, especially during totems. This thing is amazing in my opinion. When stuff's running at you, you just give one melee, chains, everything's dead in the room. Super, super fun. So hopefully y'all like this build. We have plenty more to come this season with all of these ARC 3.0 changes. So be sure to look out for those. I appreciate the support lately. Y'all are nuts. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.